Well, good morning, everyone. We are in Exodus chapter 1. I would pick up with you and maybe just read the last half of that first chapter, beginning at verse 15. We'll talk about the Hebrew midwives and just look at the rest of our questions for chapter 1. Certainly seeing God's people here in transition. So I have a reader for 15 through 21. Margaret.
Then the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, one of whom was named Shiphrah and the other Puah, when you serve as midwife to the Hebrew women and see them on the birth stool, if it is a son, you shall kill him, but if it is a daughter, she shall live. But the midwives feared God and did not do as the king of Egypt commanded them, but let the male children live. So the king of Egypt called the midwives and said to them, why have you done this and let the male children live? The midwives said to Pharaoh, because the Hebrew women are not like the Egyptian women, for they are vigorous and give birth before the midwife comes to them. So God dealt well with the midwives, and the people multiplied and grew very strong. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families. Then Pharaoh commanded all his people, every son that is born to the Hebrews you shall cast into the Nile, but you shall let every daughter live.
All right. So in our discussion questions there, I'll just go through from 1. We often focus only on the Israelites' hardships in Egypt. What was their life in Egypt like most of the years they lived there? Maybe a review question, but Margaret?
Well, for 400 years they had growth and prosperity in that land before this new kingdom came to be.
Yeah, we definitely say that God blessed them even more than you would expect, right? This group of, well, depending on what time we count, was it 66 to 70? And the family that came down with Jacob now is quite large. Again, a lot of Exodus projections and guesses, usually around like that 1 million mark, if not more. So good food, it's peaceful, no wars. Leads to a lot of little ones. So, question 2, describe the bitter labor Israel had to endure. Kind of looking there at verse 13 and 14. This new Pharaoh, Sharon?
Oppressed them, making them slaves and making their life bitter and working, and then of course later put the restrictions on all male babies. Made their life difficult as much as possible, hoping that their numbers would not grow, but it had the opposite effect.
All right, so history kind of rhymes, right? You have not necessarily an immigration problem, but you have an ethnic problem because of immigration, right? They are starting to become more and more numerous. The Egyptians might lose their identity or power, and were they a threat? Were there people rising up? We don't really seem to get that impression from the Bible, But, if you came to power by force, which it sounds like this Pharaoh did, I mean, everybody that comes to power by force is always looking over their shoulder, history tells us, and thinks that they need to have complete control. So, yeah. Through Joseph, Pharaoh came into power, consolidated peacefully, Now it's just a matter of time before another pharaoh comes, but he doesn't do it peacefully, and so the words are oppressed ruthlessly, mercilessly. That certainly implies the people were not being heard, right? Their cries to Pharaoh, at least, were unanswered. Wayne?
Boys grow up to be soldiers, soldiers enter armies.
Yeah. Very much the concern there, and reminds me of the Nepal, was it on the Bangladesh presentation at the LWMS rally? How the women were worked really hard. Pharaoh knew how to keep the army down and the work going. So, question, yeah, please.
Well, I was really kind of puzzled by the fact that there were only 2 midwives. And I wondered if they were like representative of others, or because they were like 1 million strong at this point. I can't even imagine 2 of them taking care. And then I thought, well, maybe these are like, names of the companies
They may have been the leaders of the midwives.
of the midwives. Okay.
That's a very good point. I don't know, Adrian. You used to work in a hospital with almost 500,000 people in town. How many babies were born a night? Like 14 or something?
Probably. I mean, in our little town, it was a ton to have 2 babies a night. Just in our
Yeah.
little town.
But here in the United States, we don't have babies like they probably did then.
Right, the
we
labor
had
would have been longer.
2,
you're
one for
thinking?
you, and
Yeah.
a boy for you, and a girl for me, and we're good. And that was hardly the case.
Yeah.
We can't.
I definitely see them as the representatives of the group. Pharaoh's not going to call in
Makes
every
sense.
midwife and maybe sit them all down, but these 2 women are the leaders. I guess my question, and I'll ask you guys, like, does Pharaoh really buy this? Like, does Pharaoh really believe them? Like, oh yeah, they must be just popping babies out before we can get there. They're like pop machines, and it's never been seen before, Pharaoh.
Well, they gave the order later to anyone who saw male children being born to slay them.
Yeah. So I don't know. I kind of think Pharaoh. I mean, what does Pharaoh do? I mean, he wants babies to be born. He doesn't want males to be born. He has to kind of work with who he's got, right? But I can't imagine that he went home and slept on this, and the next day he was like, oh yeah, that's. But again, I also see the Lord's intervention in this. Peter struck Malchus's ear, and Peter didn't go to jail, right? Like, the Bible is filled with, like, the Lord has a plan, and people do things that maybe you wouldn't expect. They overlook something, or they accept something. So I don't know. I see kind of a mini miracle in there that he didn't just like, I'm just going to put Egyptian midwives over there. But he did. He did well enough alone. Again, so there's a more backstory, of course, to everything. But the point is, yeah, these ladies, and they even get mentioned by name, don't they? Yeah. That they were fine examples of faith and such. Joan?
It's possible that there could be only 2 midwives for all those people, because I'm sure that the women went through their labor pretty well by themselves, and they only had the midwife to help get the baby out, clean up the baby. And that was probably it, where in a hospital now, when a woman goes, you're sitting there for hours. And
I didn't go there a second ago, but I was thinking about it. how old does Moses become before he dies? He's 80 when he 40 when he leaves. He's 80 when he comes back.
120.
He's 120 when he dies. So we are talking about Israelites here that are probably, you know, better conditioned than people today. You know, I don't know if everybody's living to 120, but
And a lot
I think they haven't had as much DDT and pesticides and sodium. There's something. There could be something to that, Joe. That their pregnancies that are natural are maybe not as, you know,
Treated as a disease.
you know, as many C-sections as we have, you know, and mothers being lost and just things like that. So I wouldn't rule that out either. Yeah.
Well, I think the Egyptians in their harshness also contributed to the strength and resilience of the Israelites. I remember as a kid hearing how they had to make their own bricks. The bricklayers had to make their own bricks, and then they had to go and fetch their own straw and their own clay to make the bricks. You know, the job became harsher and harsher, and they were still expected to meet their quotas. And
Yeah, that's chapter 5. Yeah, so that's going to be coming up.
yeah, but the women too, they had work to do and it was made harder for them. They were strengthened. I mean, hard work makes people strong if it doesn't kill them.
Yeah.
So this nation that was trying to be suppressed actually got stronger.
Yeah. It reminds me a bit of the Jacob Laban deal, where, you know, Jacob is only going to have the spotted sheep, and like, what are the odds you're going to hit a lot of spotted sheep? And, you know, he did quite well taking the minority sheep. But yeah, Wayne.
Originally, we were told the Egyptians despised the sheep herding Israelites, and I think that probably would apply to the Egyptian midwives as well. And I think growing up as a child, I remember in the town I grew up in, we hardly ever saw a black person except once in a great while. That probably was the same thing there, and the chances of them going across with each other is highly unlikely.
Yeah. I mean, we don't get details of how this new ruler came into power. Did the Israelites fight with the previous regime? I have no information on that, but I kind of tend to believe they didn't. I don't know. It's just my feeling on it is that the Israelites they were on one side of the river and always sort of secluded. You know, you might have a pharaoh that's pretty war-ridden right now, or war-fatigued, and there's this nation of Israel that hasn't been in war, you know, and that could be even though you outnumber them or something, that could be pretty intimidating.
When it said Israel, a new pharaoh that did not know Joseph, I was always under the impression for many years that the previous government was overthrown by new pharaohs coming in.
Right.
But the way this is written here sounds like the opposite. I'm not sure that's right. I don't know which one's right, but it sounded like that we were sort of the idea that a new dynasty came
Right,
in.
yeah, Pharaoh is kind of, yeah, just like the Chinese dynasties come and go. Know of Joseph, I think, I would take that as almost like know the history of the people, right? It's that shorthand for he didn't know these people were beneficial to Pharaoh and a blessing. And, but yeah, he wouldn't have known Joseph physically because Joseph would have passed away, you know, a good 300 years, give or take, before he came.
Plus the pharaoh is a god to them, and so there is no second guessing on his orders. Away with the boys. There's no second guessing that they're going door to door.
I saw a hand over here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I just had a little bit different take on just one subject there, and that is, it almost appears in here that it was okay for the midwives to lie because it benefited the baby boys. It's just kind of interesting.
Yeah, I heard a good explanation of this in the thought of like soldiers, you know, like, so the question can come up like, are soldiers murderers, you know, and people have struggled with that, and the pastor mentions the answer being, if it's your job to kill, you're not a murderer, right? You know, if the government says you are to go and fight and defend or take, and it's a just thing, you're not a murderer, even though on outward appearance a life is taken. But if it's, you know, it's not your job, and you know you're a civilian taking someone's life because you're upset, that is murder. That's not your job. So even though something could be simple in one situation, when you're called to do it, when you're called to be a midwife to protect these babies, and you lie, I mean, they were called to lie, to protect. That was their job from God to. So, yeah, I suppose, you know, we would like them to sit down with Pharaoh and have a good conversation and not have and just be forthright. But at some point in a sinful world, that's not going to happen. But yeah, you come across white lies, I'll say, in the Bible, and they do cause you to pause and think, is lying okay? They're not getting punished, or is it wrong? And so you kicked a nest. That was a good question. So we'll go. Let's over here.
I have the People's Bible here, and it says that the people, we ought to obey God rather than men, and because they felt that killing was against God's will, they did not kill the babies, and so God blessed them. That's their explanation.
Yeah. I mean, I suppose maybe to the other points that are coming up, maybe the thought would be, why can't they just be like Daniel and say, no, I'm not gonna pray to you. I pray to the true God. You know, why didn't they just come out and say to Pharaoh, no, we can't do that. That's murder, or that's wrong. So I think we can always, I don't know, lose some sleep over stuff like that. Like, why didn't they just flat out say no and trust in God to protect them? And I don't know. I'm not smart enough to say they couldn't. They did it the best way. But yeah, maybe if I was in the situation, I know the right thing to say is no. That's wrong, Pharaoh. But they're simple human beings, just as I am. So maybe I would pull my punch. But
Well, I think I've done it in my own situation, so you think about it, boy, it just is, I don't know, it's just hard to, there's other places too, you know.
sure.
Hiding the people in the attic and lying about that and those types of things, you know.
Right. Yeah, and I think, you know, again, who you're taking marching orders from, and I think that's probably a good place to start. That, you know, God doesn't always put us in situations that are easy, or, you know, never in a tough one. Margaret?
Two things. Actions speak louder than words. They let their actions speak for them, for their convictions. And the other is, are we edging into situational ethics?
You don't like situational ethics?
Depends on the
situation. What do you mean by situational ethics? Like, it's right if this, it's wrong if that.
Yeah. I mean.
Well, I think that's practical theology, right? I mean, it's a messy situation, and you know, did God tell them to lie? I mean, we're going to come into a situation where Moses goes to Pharaoh and say, "Let my people out in the desert to worship," right?
Yeah.
Okay, so we're gonna wrestle with that one too. Did they really want to go out and worship it for the weekend and come back?
Well, there's like passive resistance too. I mean, that's what these midwives were doing. They went ahead and did their job and saved the lives of the children. We aren't told that they argued with Pharaoh, but their work showed that they were disagreeing.
Sure. Another hand was in the back over here. Yeah.
That's already been talked about.
Okay.
I was going to bring up that we always obey God rather than the government. But the bottom line to all of this is, we're all sinners. Their hearts, I think, were in the right place. And that's why they chose to do what they felt God wanted them to do, okay? Yes, they may have lied. But the fact is, God works through all of us sinners to do His plan.
Sure.
And so you can bring this up in every single situation. God is in control, and He uses us sinful people here to do what His plan is.
That is correct.
Yeah.
And we might not always agree with it, but in this case, I think they did the right, I know they did the right thing.
Right. Yeah, they're definitely praised later in the scripture too, which and the fact that their names are written kind of gives you that like asterisks behind them, like these ladies were all right, you know. If their names if there had been no names, I think we would conclude, yep, they're not people to look up to or remember. I think that's a kind of a common thread throughout all of Scripture. Unless you're really bad, right? Unless you're Pilate or something. Sure.
The commentary I have here points out, which is interesting, their names are mentioned. Pharaoh's name is not mentioned. And it says that God exalts those of humble estate and brings down the mighty, referring to Luke 1:52. That was important. The God is lifting them up versus the Pharaoh, because he's a nameless person. He's nameless throughout the whole story anyways.
Before there was a Moses that saved God's people, there were these ladies, right? If you think about it. Yeah. Kind of neat. Joe?
Well, in those days, the ruler was the absolute ruler, and you did not question him, because if you did, it was off with your head. And so these ladies probably had no choice but to, behind the scenes, do this. Because you don't say no to Pharaoh because you're the next one butchered. Just like Esther was afraid to go to her own husband, who was the king, because he was so absolute like that, and he could have had her killed.
Be good with. We'll move on. We can keep. We'll have some more to chew on. 3. What purpose did the Israelites 430 years in Egypt serve in God's plan for them?
They increased in number.
Yeah, that's right, Lois. They became a great nation, increased in number. Why is this portion of Exodus recorded for us? Just to see how the Lord blessed them despite all odds, really, all forces of man and evil. So no doubt, number 4, the Israelites wondered if God would ever fulfill His promises. What are Christians often tempted to wonder about as they wait for Jesus' second coming? Margaret?
How long, oh Lord, how long?
Exactly. Is it ever going to come? And that doubt can lead to disbelief, I suppose, too, right? And we know that that's happening. Roll this on the way this way for so long, it'll keep going. either nuclear war or the sun blowing up. One of those two things will get us. You know, if it's not some sort of plague before that, right? There's this disbelief that Jesus is going to keep his promise in return. That he's gonna ring the bell and come back the way he came. Ascension Day plug. That's tomorrow. Ascension. You know, I think you'd also say too. I mean, we'll talk about it here with Moses. You know, Moses has it on his heart that there's a promise to be made or kept. Go back to the promised land, but this slavery, this hardship, is probably maybe helping them go back to those promises, right? Maybe this slavery and this brick making and the fear of their children may have them recalling more poignantly the promises to their ancestors that this is not their home. If life is too good, nobody wants to leave, right? And well, God does that for us too sometimes. Life isn't so good that we don't want to go to heaven either. Margaret?
Maybe this is kind of personal like, but my father-in-law was a sturdy Christian. He was the guy who paved the parking lot when he sold his barns and moved into town, the church parking lot for the new church building. But when he was dying, and he had a long, slow, painful death, I went to stay with him nights. And he told me one night, in the middle of the night, he couldn't sleep and the nurses were bringing morphine and stuff. He said, I think the reason my illness is so long and drawn out is because the Lord knows I want to hang on to life. And he's peeling my fingers off it one at a time. It's hard to let go. And I think these people too, it had to get worse for them before they could take that big step and cross the river and head for the promised land.
I mean, even after all their slavery, Moses is going to have a chore trying to get them to follow him. Leading a stubborn mule. It's all they knew. What reminder do Shiphrah and Puah give us about how we should act over against the government? Well, it's been stated a couple of times. I think Bev said it first. Better to obey God rather than man. Conclusion there, God gave the Israelites a wonderful place where they could grow into a nation. He allowed Pharaoh to make them slaves so that they would be anxious to leave Egypt and at the right time would experience this mighty deliverance. Any other comments? Certainly there's points in there we did not talk about in chapter 1. If not, chapter 2, we'll dig into the first 10 verses in the birth of Moses. Another reader. Bob.
Now a man of the house of Levi married a Levite woman, and she became pregnant and gave birth to a son. When she saw that he was a fine child, she hid him for 3 months. But when she could hide him no longer, she got a papyrus basket for him and coated it with tar and pitch. Then she placed the child in it and put it among the reeds along the bank of the Nile. His sister stood at a distance to see what would happen to him. Then Pharaoh's daughter went down to the Nile to bathe, and her attendants were walking along the riverbank. She saw the basket among the reeds and sent her slave girl to get it. She opened it and saw the baby. He was crying and she felt sorry for him. "This is one of the Hebrew babies," she said. Then his sister asked Pharaoh's daughter, "Shall I go and get one of the Hebrew women to nurse the baby for you?" "Yes, go," she answered. And the girl went and got the baby's mother. Pharaoh's daughter said to her, "Take this baby and nurse him for me, and I will pay you." So the woman took the baby and nursed him. When the child grew older, she took him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. She named him Moses, saying, "I drew him out of the water."
Thank you. So in verse 1 we learned Moses' dad is a man from the house of Levi. According to Exodus 6 and Numbers 26, Moses descended from the Levitical family of Kohath. According to Hebrews 11, Moses' parents' act of not being the ruler's cruel Moses' parents' act of not obeying the ruler's cruel command was an act of faith. Then it talks about his sister. This is no doubt Miriam. And according to Stephen, Moses received an education and all the wisdom of the Egyptians. Question 1. Most parents think their newborns are fine children. Read Hebrews 11:23. According to this verse, what more might Moses' parents have seen in him than fine physical characteristics? Hebrews 11.
Well, this EHV says he was a special child. But
Got the verse? Yeah?
By faith, Moses was hidden by his parents for 3 months after he was born because they saw he was a special child and they were not afraid of the king's order.
So, I pulled up all different sorts of translations, and they go everywhere from fine, handsome, special to beautiful child. And the more I try to understand what is it they are seeing in him, the more I'm kind of lost. You want to go along the lines of, they somehow know divinely that Moses is going to be a special part of God's plan? Do they look at him and, I don't know, does he have some appearance? Does he have red hair or something? And they're like, well, this is a sign that God's going to use him? I don't know. So of course, commentators make the point everybody thinks that their child is special. But there's something more here. He's not like Aaron or his brother. There's something about Moses that they know or believe that is special. I don't know. Wayne, a thought?
well, I think it's something that the child does that's not normal, that's advanced or in some way. I mean, yesterday I saw on TV an 8-year-old girl who's already piloted a plane. Well, to me that's a special child or something. It can't be just looks or the normal, oh, this is a special kid this way. He must have, some way they could tell. And maybe the Lord put it on their heart.
Yeah,
We don't
and I kind of think something along those lines too, because like physically and outwardly, what do we know about Moses' outward appearance? Cries a lot, right? I mean, I don't know. Like, maybe a mom can shed some light on this, but if you had one child that was just a really loud baby and cried a lot and kept you up at night, and then maybe you had another child that just sort of slept and kept to themselves.
I had that.
Yeah. I can't imagine. So I can't imagine, yeah, that he's crying and she's like, well, this is great because I can't hide you anymore. So you must. I think I'm gonna, there's a plan to have him be blessed and educated and such, but I don't know if we start out with her thinking that, right? It really does appear that his safety is hard, and so that this is God's way of prompting her and Moses' path to change. So I know he's a fine child or handsome or special, but then on the other hand, I mean, he's got to. And they want to keep him safe, but he's also a handful. Quite frankly, right? I can't imagine and worrisome, right? She's worried about being ratted out and being found, and yeah.
Couldn't find what they were referencing, but my self-study Bible says to the word "fine" is the same word used in Genesis 1 to describe God's good creation.
Oh, so we don't want to go there though, right? We don't want to go with perfect, right? Like holy, but maybe
He created what made him different.
Well, not
but set him apart type of thing. Or?
When God created the heaven and the earth and the land, and He saw that it was good,
Yeah.
and then He rested, and then He created man and woman. And He saw it was good.
Yeah.
Actually, we don't.
So
Yeah.
Yeah,
But I think.
So that's what they're saying, that same word is the word that they used in Genesis 1.
I'm comfortable inferring that they were on the same page with God that this child was special. Whether they felt it, whether it was like a revelation to them. I definitely would go along the lines of saying, yeah, it was more than just, there was something that divinely spoke to them, and yeah, Margaret?
Well, when Moses started his ministry, granted, he's not a baby anymore, he was grown up. He asked for help because he was a man who stuttered or had some speech difficulty.
Speech. Yeah.
So he wasn't perfect.
Oh no, yeah, and we'll definitely make the case here that he has quite a few weaknesses. But and I think of David, a man after my own heart. And
Feisty little red.
yeah, it's almost like God and Moses' parents knew that he had something special in store. So. Well, let's talk more about this fine child. Why did Moses' parents put him in the basket and place him in the Nile? Lois.
they were hoping that somebody would find him and rescue him. And why?
They were hoping someone would find him.
Yeah, this must have been this place where she always went for a bath or whatever. And that would have been known. I always figured they'd put him where somebody who was an Egyptian would find him
Yeah, I think
to
you're
take
right.
care of him. I thought it was really cool though the way they went ahead and, I know somebody that can help. And then they got paid for raising their own child. That was pretty Jewish.
Yeah, so I think over the years I've more or less gone along the lines of, if you have this crying baby, placing him in a basket all by itself in the river is not probably going to be that soothing. Right? This is not the. I mean, maybe it's a little rocking action, okay, but all in all, yeah, you are banking on, baby being found by her, or her attendants, you know, and the baby wasn't found because they went through all the weeds all the time. I'm sure this was very unmanicured Nile. So it is interesting. They don't get too suspicious about his sister being around. Like, what are you doing here? Maybe that just tells us that, you know, where this place of bathing was not like a private, you know, secluded place, like you're trespassing type of thing. Because they seem to have a really quick interchange that isn't weird. Other thoughts on the question at hand? You got to come up either with, you know, God gave Moses' parents quite the intelligence to plan this out, or God blessed a kind of shaky plan. But I think we could all agree that one of the only people that could get away with breaking Pharaoh's edict would be his daughter. Right? And I know Joan's thinking, well, how many daughters does he have? Yes, but yeah. You know, and I think there's probably some truth to that. You know, I don't see Moses and Pharaoh. I don't see him having a strong, you know, grandpa relationship with Pharaoh necessarily. I mean, he's raised in the palace, but you know, how many people can live in the palace, and how often do you see them? But yeah, she adopts him, and you know, maybe question 3 there. How did God see to it that Moses grew to know his people before he was brought into Pharaoh's home? I know what Margaret's question is. What do you mean he's not in Pharaoh's home, right? Or no?
No, I was thinking if he was a baby and small enough to put in that basket without tipping it over and drowning, if he was that small a baby, how much did he know his people?
Right. So you have to go there, John.
I won't keep doing this, but I'm just going to say this one more time, and then I see a little Christian deceit here.
I like it. Where do you see it?
Well, the daughter or the sister running over there, and then I'll take him to somebody, and she'll take care of him. And it's his mother. That's deceitful.
Yeah, she just happens to be nursing, you know, passing milk and.
Yeah, right.
We walk up and down the street, who could nurse a baby?
Yeah.
Lactating mom.
You bond with your mother in a special way when this happens. So if he was going to know his people, it would come back to the love of his mother.
Yeah, and this is very along the same lines of the Pharaoh thought of, did Pharaoh really buy into like the midwives were just not able to keep up? Does Pharaoh's daughter really believe this is a random lady? I don't necessarily. So maybe to Margaret's question, which kind of touches upon this. You know, how old is Moses when he's going into Pharaoh's house?
How long did she nurse him?
How long does she nurse him? I think People's Bible makes a comment of 3 years old. Yeah.
Maybe.
So
Yeah, but
to that point, you know, when you were 3 years old, did
Yeah.
you know that you were a, you know, red-blooded American per
would a
se?
3-year-old stay in the basket? Not mine.
No.
No.
So
was
he's
3
probably
months
being
old.
nursed.
He's
So he's
3
probably
months.
he's 3 months old,
3 months old.
but he goes to his mom's home and is
Yeah.
taken care of for up to 3 years
Right.
before he goes into.
But he's still not gonna remember anything.
No.
But again,
I know my 3-year-old know I'm Jesus' little lamb at 3 years old.
Oh, yeah.
there's,
So there's a couple of things that are probably happening. One is
so much absorbed.
One I would say is his mom is not and family is not necessarily out of the picture once he's weaned. This is not like a closed adoption. I don't get that impression, right? Because Moses has a relationship with his siblings after this, and there's not like a, hey Moses, you're an Israelite. It's like he grows up knowing this, even though he's in the palace. Second of all, I kind of wonder if you have to tell him and have this conversation with him when he realizes that his skin and his eyes and things are just different, right? Like, Margaret, you could adopt me and you could probably fool me all my life that you're my mom, but not everybody could do that, right? Just
But you
culturally.
don't look like Andy and Bill.
But yeah, maybe at some point, so there's really an openness there, and he's never led to believe that he's different, which might incline that he's kind of the stepchild, right, of Pharaoh, right? I would think he would be treated differently by others in the palace too, even. But again, he's kind of got a hedge around him, but he knows who he is and who his people are. Joan, yes.
Well, I don't think Pharaoh's daughter did any work to speak of. I think she had a pretty pampered life there. And I think that Moses' mother was hired as the nanny. And she would basically take care of him and let him go and spend some time with the princess when the princess wanted him.
If she has a big heart for this little child, would you argue she doesn't have a big heart for the mom? That's a story we're not told, but that's not too weird to think. Like, she's playing savior to a baby and savior to a mom, right? So to say that, to think that everybody's being deceitful a little bit, like, I don't know what Pharaoh's daughter and Moses' mom said to each other. I gotta think that, boy, she's not like the best actress in the world, with this baby, and people don't pick up on it. But at a certain point, she does let him go live in the palace, right? She knows this is what's best for her son, God's plan. I know, the last person I see is my wife.
It's real quick.
Yeah.
Wouldn't he be circumcised? So wouldn't she know immediately that he was a Jewish boy? Like, can't.
She just, I mean, she's also, so he would
be different in that way.
he would be
No matter
be
what other boys
circumcised, yeah.
he would be around. He's marked as a child of God of of those people. So, right? I mean, did circumcision happen before that? I forget which. Right?
Yeah.
Which happened.
So
which happened before
Abraham
that
is,
then. Okay.
yeah.
8 days.
You say again?
Circumcised at 8 days and it was 3
Right.
months.
I just
8
did.
days, yeah.
So I didn't know if it happened before the Exodus.
So reason to believe that, but the fact that he's abandoned is kind of the cue here, I believe. So, well, apply. I think we did number 3. We did do number 3, yes. Okay. 4. When asking that God would guide and lead another person, we dare not forget that God can move hearts to do His will. How were Moses' parents banking on this in this light? Why is prayer so important? So, God moved the princess's heart to have compassion on Moses. I think the editor's pointing out that this compassion only is really from the Lord, isn't it? Do we pray that people have a change of hearts? Yeah. I think when we pray for people to have faith, right? We're praying that God would work in them a new heart and a new attitude towards Him and His Word. And I think the question is implying too, what did Moses' mom do? He literally turned him over to the Lord. The Lord has to take care of him. And of course, the Lord answered the prayer with her pretty quickly, but yeah. So again, I think we marvel at how God is working His will through this woman. And who knows, maybe one day we'll find out she wasn't able to have children, and and God used that too. So yeah, John.
This comes to mind this morning because of how God answers prayers. We lost part of our riverbank in fall before we left, and I hired a guy to get me permits to be able to restore it with the riprap. And he contacted me numerous times all winter long saying things aren't going good, our first permit was denied, da 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 da. Right up until the day before yesterday, the guy I hired, and he's a professional at doing this, he says, we have a conference call tomorrow, but he said, I'm not hopeful. He said, things are not looking good at all. They're going to have the fish and wildlife, they're going to have all 5 departments of the DNR on the phone with us, and so on. And I just prayed the night before. I said, Lord, if it is your will, grant that we can do something to the shoreline to protect our property, and so on. And you would not have believed that conference call. It was extremely positive. They put XYZ on the phone. He's in charge of all the fish reproduction and so on. He said, I have no problem with the project. The other guy wasn't on the line, but we get a text back or an email back shortly thereafter. He said, I have no problem with the project. The guy that is working with the DNR used to work for Marathon County when we got all of our permits to build the house, and he was at our property at least 3 times. So I said to Jan this morning, as we were doing our devotion, God sure answered our prayers. I mean, it's not approved yet, but extremely. And so I get a call from the guy I hired, called me about an hour later because he was on the conference call also. He said, I can't believe this. He said, I've never seen one go this way. So, we have a lot of examples of God answering prayer, but that was just an interesting situation.
Psalm 34 says, the Lord hears them in their trouble and He answers them. And I've had the same experiences in different ways.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Yeah. Question 5. Focus on these words of verse 9, and I will pay you. What lesson does this teach us about God's blessings?
They could even come from unusual places.
Exactly.
Yeah. Now you're going to be taken care of too. Denise?
All the other Israelites and stuff were made to suffer, harsh labor out in the fields and, making bricks and stuff. And here she's being paid to take care of her own child. And it couldn't have been that hard of labor for her to do this and provide for her family. So God, really helped them out with that blessing.
We didn't talk about it, but it starts right. That chapter starts out with a man from the house of Levi went and took a Levite woman as a wife. What do you think that sentence is telling us?
Ordinary people.
Ordinary people?
He had godly priorities.
I think that's what I'm hearing. Yeah. God like priorities. kind of gets the Job kind of introduction, a man of God, a servant of the Lord. Not to say every Levite was more developed than the others, but from what we know about the Levites, this is quite fitting. And so the Lord is smiling upon her, and yeah. So I guess maybe to Denise's point, a 3-year-old is singing "I am Jesus' little lamb." Moses was, or was it a different one? But Moses was brought up in the Lord, so godly parents. Joan?
Well, the point that Moses was a Levite, and the Levites were the chosen tribe of Israel to do the ceremonial things with the temples and the tabernacles and the various feasts and all those things.
Yeah.
And Aaron was the first high priest. However, I still question that one.
Yeah, and I think too, you go through all the tribes of Israel like we did a couple weeks ago, and Levites don't get any land, and what that tells us or tells me is that they were not an earthly family, right? They were to be godly minded and spiritual leaders. Let other nations war, let other nations have crops, let other nations have lots of babies. But you're going to serve the Lord and be God's people. And you just see that here by God choosing some godly parents to have Moses and be his representatives.
And Moses wasn't very old as a child, and their daughter had to be very old to do what she did, go to lunch and to be able to tell Pharaoh's daughters. Maybe there were even other
Right.
children between her and Moses.
And someone correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't Aaron older also?
Yes.
He is older.
He must have missed, we don't, what his age was when that edict by the Pharaoh went, because obviously Aaron.
He either missed the edict or
they kept him.
he wasn't a colicky baby, right? He wasn't crying, and he got through like the other children of Abraham, Israel, that didn't have to be hidden.
My self-study Bible
He was like 3 years
estimates he was like 3, 3 years older than
old.
most of
Yeah.
us.
So let's close with prayer. Lord, we again marvel at your plan, how you work in the hearts of your people and even in the hearts of those who reject you to accomplish your will, especially that of our salvation. Continue to work in our hearts and in the hearts of others too, that you'll guide our ways and like Moses and the Israelites will be blessed by it. Amen. Praise God from whom all blessings flow. Praise Him, all creatures here below. Praise Him above, ye heavenly hosts. Praise Father, Son, and Holy